Do the Dallas Cowboys need to consider benching Terence Steele? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet that has $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at McCoolBCB. Landon, you and I have had a chance to review the All-22 film from the Cowboys' Week 9 loss against the Eagles, and I want to start with Terence Steele. Now, we touched on him a little bit on Monday's show, but after watching the tape, do you feel like the Cowboys need to consider sitting him down for a couple weeks to get him right?
I think on our side, we need more information. On their side, they should have the information they need, because I think the kind of determining factor on whether benching Terence Steele is a good thing or not has to do with what's going on with his body, right? Like, because after watching the tape last night, I do feel like stiffness and some of the stuff with the left knee could be part of the issue here. I had a long conversation with you and John Owning and some other folks, and the more you watch what's going on with him, his problems seem to stiff, and really it's a lot. It's very clear to see when he's going against Reddick, right? Because when he was going against Reddick, he wasn't having problems getting out of his stance, going backwards, getting to the top of the arc. You didn't see him being beaten around the edge a ton by Reddick, which I think that actually hid a lot of his problems that we didn't see in training camp, right? Because you saw him explosive getting off the ball. You saw him explosive getting back. Where he's having issues is laterally having to suddenly change direction, right? When Reddick gets to the top of the arch and beats and comes back inside and uses his hands, you just see like, and I in my mind, again, I'm filling in here. I don't know for sure, but it looks like to me that Steele is uncertain about planting his foot back the other direction. He's worried about, hey, is my foot going to turn underneath me? Is my ankle going to get twisted? Yeah. Is my knee going to, buckle underneath me if I change directions? And, we have to think about what it's like to be an offensive tackle in the NFL. You're on an island a lot. You're usually, trying to block a player who is a much, much, much better athlete than you. In order to survive something like that, you have got to be tough and you've got to have really great technique. And if you're worried about your own technique because you're worried that your knee is going to give up, guess what? A guy like Hassan Reddick, who's one of the best pass rushers in the league, he's not going to wait for you to get to the inside strong. He's going to make that move inside. And I think you saw it on Sunday when anytime that they took him inside, anytime that Reddick came inside, you saw Steele really struggle. And then it was compounded by the fact that they were mixing in Brandon Graham in the second half, and Graham was using speed to power on him. So I just felt like after watching the game, you're just watching Steele kind of chase the dragon, right? He's throwing his hands too quick. He's leaning because he's concerned about that he's not going to be athletic enough to block Reddick. So he's doing the classic thing, right? He's trying to get his hands on the defender quickly. And what does that mean? That means he's waist bending. He's reaching too far. He's losing balance. He doesn't have great contact balance because of the knee anyways. And it just becomes a snowball effect. And then you throw in another pass rusher like Brandon Graham, who's just going to further confuse the issue by throwing some speed or power. I just think that it became a hell game for Steele. He was caught in a black hole of just being wrong and constantly guessing and not trusting his technique. And so the bottom line, to answer your question, The question is, will he get healthier, or will he start to trust the knee more by playing on it? That's what we need to. That's what we don't know. So is it going to be beneficial to just swap him out? It may be temporarily, but it may not be best for the long run for getting a better Terence Steele later in the season.
What complicates this is that you just gave him a really big extension, and you kind of need him to figure things out, and you really need him to figure things out quickly, right? I think they can get, I'm not saying they're going to win every game, but I think they should be able to get by with him over the next 4 weeks until you get to the Philly game. But you need him to be right, not only for that Eagle game, but also for the playoffs. And is sitting him for 3 games or 4 games, let's say you put him on IR, whatever, is that going to help? Or is it going to be more beneficial to him to continue to play, continue to trust his footing, and kind of just start to figure things out? I don't know, but I saw the same thing not only from this week, but from the last couple of weeks. He's not getting beat with speed. I mean, he's gotten beat a couple of times with speed, but it's almost been everything either where he's getting beat inside or guys just getting underneath him and just driving him back to the quarterback. That's almost more concerning for me, to be honest.
Listen, I tend to think that if there is, I tend to think that the best thing to do is to let him play it through. I know it's tough because
I'm with you, because you also don't want to move Udoga over there, who's been playing really well at left tackle, who's been playing at left guard, and now having him switch sides. I think you need Udoga to be you need him to be your swing guy anyways.
And I think that's what the Cowboys think too. I mean, I think McCarthy's comments yesterday about Steele were basically implying that, right? That he has some stuff to work through I think he phrased it as he still is working through some things related to the injury. I think that has to do with the stiffness. It has to do with the uncertainty about the knee. I think the more he plays on it, the better he's going to be. I think just he'll get more and more comfortable with it. And I do think that the run game stuff has started to turn around a little bit more. Like that's where I feel like he's actually made improvements. As opposed to the pass protection stuff, which I don't think has gotten better yet. But I think it can. I think it and I have faith that in the long term in Steele, the question is like, when is he going to get closer to health and start playing closer to the guy that we signed? And is that going to be this season? I think that's really the big question: is can he get somewhere closer to where he was this season, or is it going to take another offseason of kind of getting himself right and getting his head right about his knee?
Just to show where he's at this year, among offensive tackles that have played at least 500 snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, lowest graded tackle in the NFL this season.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he has to work through this. And most tackles that were playing like this, you would pull them because you need to see somebody else. But this is a situation where I think we know that Terence Steele is talented, but the problem is that he's got, it's very similar to the Gallup situation, right? Where it's not just about being physically able to do the job and being physically able to complete the requirements of the position. It's about being confident enough to play at a high level to go against, an NFL athlete that you're facing. So that's where, they just kind of have to continue to put him out there to let him get that confidence back.
Yeah. Now the next couple of games aren't going to necessarily be easy. They're easier opponents, but the matchups are going to be tough. You're going against Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari, Brian Burns the following week. Now the Commanders game, we'll see on that one. Who's playing hedge for them?
They may trade another. They may trade another defensive end before we play them. Honestly, even though the trade deadline's over.
Yeah. So I do think the Cowboys will be fine with Steele at right tackle for the next couple of games. You're just hoping over the next month or so things get better, because it's been pretty rough in the first half of the season. Landon, let's talk about the defense, who gave up far too many explosive plays on Sunday. We will get to them next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. I absolutely love PrizePicks. It's so much fun. There's so many different players and stats to choose from. It just makes the Sundays go by so much faster and so much fun. PrizePicks has something that I really like. It's called the reboot policy. Well, they'll reboot one of your entries if one of your players is injured in the first half and does not return for the second half. That's now available for the NFL and basketball games. Again, that player is now rebooted from your entry into your lineup. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Absolutely fantastic. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Football season is here. We're halfway through the season, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Hosts Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs will break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for your team's matchups, your fantasy lineup, your betting angles, and so much more. Plus, get the in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Landon, let's talk about the Cowboys defense. They gave up 28 points in this game, but it was the explosive plays that just absolutely killed them.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I think sustained a lot of these Eagle drives, and ultimately it was the explosive plays for most of the game, and then for at least one of the drives, I think it was the multiple penalties that kind of continued to extend a drive that didn't necessarily seem very promising for them early on, right? So I think that the real issue seemed to be that they and look, I think it corresponds if you look at the explosive plays and where they fall in the game. Once the Cowboys had kind of stopped or put a Band-Aid over the explosive plays, the Eagles, punted 3 times, except for obviously the drive where the penalties happened, right? So, after I think they had the 29-yard touchdown to Smith is obviously a big one. The last big play that they had was the pass to Goddard. But outside of that, like on a play-by-play basis, I felt like the Cowboys did a pretty decent job in kind of slowing things down. I mean, look, you still haven't had a 100-yard receiver or a 100-yard rusher in these games. So they were able to kind of slow AJ Brown down a little bit after a hot start early in the game. Obviously, Smith got his touchdown, but I do think that, considering the fact that the concerns over, an inability to stop the run and an inability to kind of stop some of the superstars in Philly's offense on a play-by-play basis, I think they did a good job. But the problem is that all it takes is 1 or 2 of these explosive plays per drive, and suddenly they're scoring. So, if the Cowboys get off the field in that penalty drive, I think suddenly you're talking about a 21-point game on the road, which I think is pretty good. But I think that that's not what happened. They gave up a lot of explosive plays, and it mattered, and it ultimately, I think, was the difference in the game. Was Philly's ability to on the ground and in the air as well, create explosive plays when they needed them in order to extend their drives, and ultimately, that's what put points on the board for them.
I mean, and this is nothing new for Dan Quinn's defense against the Eagles. Like, they've given up a lot of explosive plays in their last 3 matchups. And if you go back to the game on Christmas Eve last year, the Eagles got explosive plays all game long in the passing game. And that was with Gardner Minshew, but the Cowboys made up for it by getting several strip sacks, and they recovered several fumbles. They didn't do it in this game. Now, they had opportunities. There was 3 fumbles. The Cowboys recovered 0 of them. And that's really the difference in this game. Like, you allow 28 points and you don't force a turnover. You're probably going to lose most of those games.
Yeah, and I think that's you've got to be able to do one, right? You've got to be able to limit explosives or take the ball away. If you don't do either, you're going to get what you got. And frankly, 28 points, considering that is not a ton of points, considering they were playing at home. But it was enough, and I think that's the problem.
Were talking pre-show, like if you just hold them to 1 field goal instead of a touchdown and it's 24 points rather than 28 points, you probably win this game because your Cowboys aren't going for a 2. I mean, they're not trying to go on 4th down from the 2-yard line. At the end of the game, they're kicking a field goal to win that game. I mean, it's a totally different game if you don't have to score a touchdown in that final 4 minutes.
I think that this is a good time to bring up a kind of overall point I'd like to bring up about this game is that this was a coin flip game. Like this isn't a situation where the Eagles dominated the game and the Cowboys barely could hold on. Like these were two very balanced teams that both are very good, that both can impose their will on their opponents. Any one of these plays that had gone the other way, the ball bounces the Cowboys' hands, they get an extra inch from Schoonmaker, or they get a penalty called on the Schoonmaker being tackled. It's just like any one of these things had gone the Cowboys' way, they could have won this game. So I think that the Cowboys, this is not a losing script for the Cowboys. Like this isn't like there are things that the Cowboys need to correct, but defensively, like they just really need to cut down like 2 or 3 of these explosive plays, because expecting no explosive plays against the Eagles offense it's not going to happen. So I think it's fair to say that they did a pretty decent job. If they could have limited 1 or 2 more of their explosive plays, not gotten 1 or 2 of these penalties on defense, sure, I think you're talking about a different score and maybe a different win.
Here's my concern. We heard Mike McCarthy a couple of weeks ago say we are a defensive-minded team. Now, I don't know if you want to believe that or not, but he did say it at a press conference, right? Against the 49ers and Eagles, you have given up a combined 70 points in those 2 games on defense. Now, some of that in the 49er game had to do with some turnovers that put the 49ers in good scoring position, but they also didn't play their starters at all, really, in the fourth quarter. So you've got to find a way to be better on defense against the top 2 teams in the NFC. You can't just give up 28 points, 42 points in these games. I'm hoping that the defense can start to find some answers against better opponents, because we know when they play bad offenses, like they're going to dominate them. But when you play really good offenses, can you find a way to get turnovers? Can you prevent explosive plays? We just haven't seen it a lot this year.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you and I kind of feel very similarly about defense in that it's often dictated and frankly, mostly dictated by the offenses that they're playing. Yeah. So yeah. I think that, the points per game thing is like, it's tough. Whenever you're playing 2 very good offenses, they're going to score points, no matter how good your defense is.
You're not going to hold the Eagles to 17 points and win a game.
Yeah.
You're just not.
But you're right. Like if we're going to go through the criticism of how those good defenses should be manifesting themselves against good offenses, they should be creating opportunities for their own teams, whether that be turnovers or whatever. And I think the Cowboys defense did that at certain points. The fact that they were able to get 3 straight 3-and-outs or 3 straight punts out of the Eagles at a key element in the game when the Eagles could have put the game away, that's a positive. And that's what championship level defense does. We still needed 1 or 2 more plays from this defense in order to kind of put this Eagles game away. I think that you could say the same thing about the offense. And so this to me is like the perfect coach's game, honestly, right? Where you played pretty well, but clearly there's a ton to clean up still and kind of work through. I do feel a lot better. Again, I think that's the one thing about this. The only moral victory aspect of it is that I feel actually better about the way this team is playing post-game than I did pre-game. It's just the harsh reality of the playoff scenario at this point.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't really buy moral victories, but at least coming out of this game, it feels like if the offense makes 1 more play, and you're not even a big play, you just score from the 6-yard line.
Yeah.
You win the game, rather than the 49er game where it's like that game wasn't close at all. Exactly. You could have 5 plays for the Cowboys that all go your way, and they're still not winning that game. So I agree. There are definitely things to clean up on both sides, especially on defense. We'll see what adjustments the Cowboys make over the next month. Lane, I want to talk about a couple offensive players who are seeing their arrows go up after this Eagle game. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That is $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Landon, do you know what the spread is for Cowboys Giants on Sunday? Have you looked?
I haven't looked yet, but the Cowboys are playing at home, right? So I would say 7 points. I mean, they're missing their starting quarterback, right?
Oh, you're way low. 16 last time on FanDuel. It's the
I
biggest
didn't
one of the
even know they
season.
give lines for 16 points
16.
in the NFL. My
Yeah.
God. Okay.
God, I kind of like the Cowboys minus
Kind
16.
of like the over, honestly, but yeah, still.
Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, Lena, let's talk about a couple players who had pretty decent performances on Sunday. Let's start with Jake Ferguson because he's been on a lot of debates on Twitter about Jake Ferguson this morning. If you follow Cowboys Twitter, what was your thoughts on Ferguson in this game?
I thought he played really well. I mean, I think this is a guy that is ascending hardcore. We've been talking about it last few weeks. He had a couple of drops at the top of the reception, and you and I talked about how there needs to be a little bit better play there. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, before he had one of those incompletions, he had something like 16 straight targets that had been converted for catches or something like that. I can't remember what the number was. And then on top of that, just, lots of great yards after catch stuff. Had the big play down the field for 30 yards and 38 yards, I think. And just really, what was really fun was going back and watching him blocking in this game, because there were definitely times when, there was one block where you just watch him bury Brandon Graham on the goal line. I can't remember exactly which drive it was, but he's just become really fun to watch. I really like him with the ball in his hands in a way that the Cowboys haven't had a tight end like that. And I think that there is still some things he's still got lots of things to clean up and get better at. But I mean, the ascension is clear, and to the point where you're excited about him being a focus of this offense, and kind of the number 2 to CeeDee Lamb. I mean, let's be honest, he's basically the second, the best target that they have on this team at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that he's getting better and better. I still would like to see a little bit more consistency. And you mentioned the drops. Officially, no drops in this game, but there were 2 plays where the ball hit him directly in the hands and the Eagles were able to knock it away.
Yeah.
I just want him to get a little bit stronger at the catch point. And listen, I don't want to ever compare somebody to Jason Witten, but one of Witten's strengths was if the ball hit his hands, no matter how many guys were grabbing at his arms and his hands, he wasn't dropping that pass. And there were a couple, big plays in this game where there was a third down where Dak threw an absolute dime across the middle of the field. Now the ball was a little high.
Man.
It was high, but it hits Ferguson in both hands and he is unable to bring it down. It's been a little bit of an issue over the last couple of weeks with Ferguson, or not over the last couple of weeks, this season with Ferguson. I would just like to see him get a little bit better in that area, because if he does, there's no reason why he can't be a top 5 or 6 tight end in the NFL.
Yeah, Witten has pretty much proven that his head could be knocked off and he would still catch it, and it almost was in Philly a couple of years ago. I don't disagree. I think part of what's happening too is, to be fair to Ferguson, is that he's putting himself in a position to put his hands on balls that Witten would never have been able to reach, because of elevation. But you're right. Like, if he's touching it, especially with 2 hands, he's got to come down with it. Look, part of the appeal of having a tight end is a reliability aspect. So you're 100% correct. The streak of receptions is important, but if he's getting his hands on the ball, he's got to come down with it for sure.
All right, let's talk about Tony Pollard, who had a fine day, 12 carries for 50 something yards. Should have had a touchdown, got called back because of a weird penalty that we don't need to talk about.
No, we're going to talk about that. Honestly, we got to talk about it. I've witnessed it, and I wasn't 100% sure because I heard Nate Tice talk about it, but then I went back and watched the tape. You can clearly see, first of all, you can clearly see where the umpire is on the field because he walks out of the frame of the all-22. You clearly see Dak turn towards and if you're on YouTube, you can see me, and I'm sorry if you can't podcast. He clearly turns to the ref and goes like this, moving his hands across his chest, which is the symbol for eligible receiver. And he points like he goes, did you that? Huh? You gonna head up? Huh? Did you do this? Did you get that? And it got an acceptable answer. It must have said yes, right? I'm assuming he didn't say no. And then Dak was like, oh, screw it. I don't care. And then went into the center, handed off the ball. Obviously Tony scores. They call it back for, illegal participation, or what was, I can't remember exactly what the
Illegal formation.
Illegal formation, which, yeah. So again, ultimately that's my issue with the rest, is that, they can't even do the simple stuff to get through the games. Okay. Anyways, Tony Pollard. I agree. Pollard's numbers, were fine. Nothing to write home about. Certainly nothing that should include him at the end of this list, for players with their arrows up. The reason I wanted him included here is because when you went back and actually watched the game, he looked different in the second half in a way that he didn't look like in the first half. And I don't think he's looked at different points in the season. And I don't know. Look, I don't believe in the idea that running backs get healthier necessarily as the season goes on, because of all the touches they take. But I wonder if maybe he isn't starting to feel better with his knee in a way that he hasn't been the previous, because the explosion that you saw, and he averaged a whole yard per carry on his touches in the second half more than he did in the first half. But beyond that, you saw different times when he ran a Texas route near the goal line, right? Which is just, if you guys don't know, it's just an angle out and then an angle back in, right? Mm-hmm. And his explosion back inside, he was wide open, and I think that was the actual pass, if I'm not mistaken, that Ferguson, they tried the deep back of the end zone toss to Ferguson, and it was a little bit high. But unfortunately, Pollard was wide open, and frankly, if Dak had just given it to him, I think he would have walked into the end zone. Probably. But the explosion that he got in and out of that break was different than we've seen in a while. I just felt like his movement was a lot better. So I'm excited to see if that's the case, if Pollard can kind of actually get a little bit more explosiveness, or just starting to feel a little better in his knee. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, because we still have, we're at the halfway point of the season, and pretty soon he's going to get to that, feared 200 carries mark and start really feeling it. But I just wanted to point out that it felt like we saw a different athlete from Tony Pollard in the second half than we did in the first.
We also saw Jalen Tolbert have his first touchdown of his career. He made a nice play down the field in the second half in this game. Now the fourth down play, I still don't understand necessarily why Dak threw that ball there with him in coverage. I know that might've just been part of the progression there, but it does seem like Jalen Tolbert is having a bigger role on this offense.
Yeah. And actually, it was interesting hearing Bones talk about it, right? Like, because he was talking about having to kind of navigate the fact that, some of these players that that are his stalwarts are starting to get more and more playing time. And I do think that Tolbert is someone that they need to start working in more. I just think that, what we've seen from Gallup has not been enough in the consistency. And I think that Tolbert has shown you enough throughout training camp, and then in his opportunities in the regular season, that, maybe he's got something here. I think especially what we saw was that there's a chemistry between him and Dak on plays that are broken, right? And broken plays. He understands where to go to find the open spot in the zone. I think that's probably part of his background, basketball background, just finding open space and filling it, right? So I think that that's something that's really that we could get a little bit better. That I think Gallup has missed, honestly, at different points, is just knowing where to go when the play breaks down in order to create space to get yourself open. That's something that I think Tolbert can exploit a little bit.
Yeah, I would love to see Tolbert get more and more snaps every week, because it does feel like he fits this offense maybe a little bit better than Gallup does. I think he fits CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson better. I fully expect to see more Jalen Tolbert over the next month or so. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow we'll be back answering your Twitter questions, so make sure that you send them in to us. We are free and available on all platforms. Check us out on YouTube as well. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.